Jam-packed with competitions, great music, your call.
That's the situation so far. We'll have more details for you in our next bulletin.
We come back, tell the nation precisely
in Elliot and South.
Holloway is to take over as player-manager of the club. Holloway's been at Queen's Park Rangers.
1996, the hits continue here on 14:58 AM. Good morning.
There's a range of commercial radio services, often called independent radio services, and those are the ones that are not publicly funded. They don't get the licence fee money, and they're not part of the BBC's overall control areas.
The first independent local radio stations came on air in 1973. There was then a fairly rapid period of expansion when we moved quickly up to 19 stations covering about 2/3 of the country. Thereafter, the pace of expansion tended to go a bit up and down depending on government policy at the time. But I'm pleased to say that since 1990, when the Radio Authority was established, we've been moving ahead fairly briskly. We're currently advertising about 2 new licences every month, and we're now up to a total of about 180 individual local commercial licences in the system.
In some of the larger areas of the country, there is now tremendous choice, where once you had very little choice on the listening dial, now you have a whole range of stations doing a lot of different things.
Well, our broad strategy now is to take the existing tier of independent local radio, which covers virtually all of the country. If we do find some places which don't have any commercial local radio service at all, we give them a high priority because we believe it's important to bring some choice to everybody. But beyond that, our strategy is now focusing very much on developing in 2 different directions. Firstly, by introducing a number of larger scale regional licences covering a number of individual areas with the objective of broadening audience choice and introducing more specialist formats that might not otherwise be viable. But equally, we're also moving downwards, if you like, into another tier of more small scale locally based stations covering individual districts and localities, small towns, each of which have their own identity, which we think can be reflected through local radio.
22 jobs are to go following a reorganisation of the Education Department at Wiltshire County Council. The redundancies will include 7 top-level education officers' posts.
This hits Galaxy 101. It's almost 10 to 1. Michael Jackson, they don't care about it.
Galaxy Radio, which is based in Bristol, is an example of the regional type of station. It's a much larger scale of coverage than we would find for a typical first-generation station. And the output of that station, dance music aimed at a younger audience, because of its more specialist appeal, is more viable because it's provided over a wider geographical area.
We're actually serving 2 countries, which is interesting, but we have a big transmission area, over 2 million potential listeners, and we broadcast for the under 35s, which makes us very different to the local competition.
And a very good morning to you. Welcome to Sunrise Radio's Breakfast for this Monday morning. Trust you've had a fabulous weekend. This is Tony Patty in the hot seat with you until 9 o'clock.
We're very pleased and proud of what we've achieved in the sphere of ethnic minority radio. We currently license 10 different independent local radio stations which are owned, managed and broadcast to specific ethnic minorities. All of them viable, all of them serving a really distinctive ethnic group that would not otherwise be served by BBC or any other kind of radio.
Because he's a fellow Scot, Edward.
I know that. You see, we're not
Good point. What's your name?
I'm glad that Sandy...
Eric, please stay on the line. Keep your radio switched off. Come to you as soon as we can. Thank you.
Well, the authority has licensed 3 independent national stations. One of the things that we were set up to do by government was to introduce national commercial radio into this country for the first time. And that came along almost 20 years after local commercial radio.
Free call 0500 1053 89 is the telephone number. When we come back, you can tell the nation precisely what you think. This is Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, Virgin. Thank you.
The Gnome and Promenade, 2 of Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition, played there by the Orchestre Nationale de France.
The authority also issues temporary licences. We're currently licensing around 300 of these services a year. They're for a usual maximum of 28 days and for a small coverage area, such as the town or part of a city. They broadly fall into 2 categories: special events or trials. The special events services can be for a very wide range of reasons, including religious conventions, drive-in movies, sports events, cultural events. Typically, one might run for an agricultural show, for instance, during the summer months.
13 minutes to 1 here at Show FM 107, broadcasting live from the showground here.
You can only get so much information onto an established radio station to cover just the one event in an area. So we thought that it would be a good idea to offer, using restricted service licenses, a service that would provide that show with its unique traffic and travel information, news and event information, and therefore be a very proactive tool for those shows. And the restricted service licence is an excellent way of doing it.
So stay tuned to Show FM on 107. We'll be giving you all
That's an example of an event service. The second main reason for granting temporary licences is to trial services. These are used by groups who wish to apply for a local licence from us in future and use the temporary licence to train their group members, test out their programming ideas and gain local support for their service.
From the heady heights of dizzy Albert Square, let's go to Australians suffering
From the point of view of the Department of Programming and Advertising, the department I head, we safeguard what comes out of the loudspeaker. The radio in people's homes, a flow of programming and advertising will come out of that loudspeaker, and it's important to ensure that standards are maintained within that flow. We must make sure that broadcasts aren't offensive, they aren't misleading, they aren't partial, and also, on a different strand, to ensure that radio stations are doing what they said they would when they applied for the license. And we do that by coming up with codes. We have 3 codes of practice with regards to programming and advertising. We have the News and Current Affairs Code, we have the Programming Code, and also the Code of Advertising and Sponsorship. Fairly thin volumes, and these give basically the rules, what you do and what you shouldn't do, and some guidance notes that accompany those. The promise of performance is a 3 or 4 page document which details the sort of level of speech that will be broadcast, the types of music and the quantities, the extent to which programming may or may not be locally originated. These sorts are very important factors, and it's on the strength of that we would safeguard the character of that service. In terms of policing that, we may receive complaints. These may frequently be from other radio stations operating in the same area. They may be from listeners who thought they were getting one station, now feel they're getting another.
And in order to do that, we need to know just a few brief details from you.
What we do is we encourage listeners to write in rather than telephone us, although obviously we take telephone calls in the first instance. And when they write to us, we send them a form, which we ask them to fill in, give them the date and time of the programme. And then we send for tapes of the output complained about. It may be a programme, it may be an advertisement. And we listen to those tapes. And we also take the view of the company on the item complained of, and then we either uphold the complaint or we don't, and we tell the company of our view. The Broadcasting Act gives us a number of sanctions. We can impose a correction or an apology, or we can impose a fine, or we can shorten a licence, or we can revoke a licence. These are fairly extreme measures, and we mostly find that simply by publishing complaints in our quarterly complaints bulletin, that's enough to deter companies from making the same mistake again. They don't like humiliation.